There are moments in life when everything you thought was certain crumbles in an instant, and mine came with 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test in a dimly lit bathroom on a cold October night in Cedar Falls, Iowa. My name is Abigail, and this is the story of how I lost everything before I even graduated high school, how the people I loved most abandoned me when I needed them, and how a miracle found me shivering on a sidewalk when I had nothing left but faith. But before I tell you about the stranger who saved my life, before I tell you about the man who would teach me to love again, I need to take you back to where it all began, to the autumn of my senior year, when I still believed in fairy tales. It was October in the heartland of America, and the leaves were turning gold across our small Midwestern town. I was 17, walking to Jefferson High with Matt by my side, and the future seemed as bright as the morning sun cutting through those autumn trees. Matt wasn't just my boyfriend, he was the boyfriend, the one every girl at school whispered about in the hallways. His father had built a business empire that made him the richest family in Cedar Falls, and Matt, with his charming smile and easy confidence, was the golden heir to all that wealth. Me? I came from something completely different. Every Sunday my family gathered at our humble community church just outside town, where the congregation sang black gospel music that made the walls shake with joy and praise. We didn't have lake houses or business empires, but we had faith, and we had each other. Or at least, I thought we did. Matt and I spent that fall making plans, college applications, dreams of the future, Sunday dinners. At his family's estate that felt like scenes from a movie I was lucky enough to be living. One night in late October, just before Halloween, we lay together under a homemade quilt on his living room floor, jack-o'-lanterns flickering shadows across the walls, talking about everything and nothing. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like nothing could ever go wrong. But life has a way of teaching us that safety is just an illusion we hold on to until reality kicks down the door. A few weeks later, I felt strange. Something was different, wrong, off in a way I couldn't quite name. That sick feeling in my stomach wasn't going away, and when I rushed to the bathroom, one morning, my heart already knew what my mind was desperately trying to deny. That night, with trembling hands, I confided in my mother. We sat together in the dim light of our bathroom, and I watched her face. As we waited for those 3 minutes that would change everything, when 2 pink lines slowly appeared on that test, my mother whispered, "Oh, honey," and pulled me into her arms. We cried together. We prayed together. And for one beautiful moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. My mother called it a blessing, even as tears streamed down both our faces. But we both knew the world around us wouldn't see it that way. The next day, I called Matt, my voice shaking as I told him the news that made his face go pale through the phone screen. He ran his fingers through his hair, that nervous gesture I'd seen 100 times before, but this time it meant something different. "Abigail, this is unexpected," he said, his voice careful, measured, distant. "Your parents and mine will never understand. Please, be careful." Those words, be careful, they weren't a promise. They were a warning. They were goodbye. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't say he'd stay. He just said he cared, and then the line went dead, and I was alone in my bedroom, crying into my pillow, praying to God for strength I didn't know how to find. The following morning, I learned through a classmate's whisper that Matt was already gone. His parents had whisked him away to Europe, far from the scandal, far from the responsibility, far from me. The fairy tale had ended, and I was left holding the pieces of a life that was shattering, faster than I could catch them. But the worst was yet to come, because I still had to tell my own parents. And nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. I found them at the kitchen table one morning, and with my heart hammering in my chest, I whispered the words that would destroy my world. "Mom, Dad, I'm pregnant." My father's fist slammed against the table so hard the coffee cups jumped. "What did you say?" he roared, his face twisted with anger and shame. My mother gasped, tears already streaming down her face, and I felt my legs give out beneath me. I had expected disappointment. I had expected lectures and consequences. What I didn't expect was the look in my father's eyes, the look that said I had become something he couldn't bear to see. "People are talking," my mother sobbed, her voice breaking. "We have to think of the family." And in that moment, I understood. They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. By that evening, I was walking out into the cold October night, shivering, alone, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The house that had been my sanctuary my entire life had become a place I was no longer welcome. I had been kicked out of school for the scandal. My boyfriend had fled to another continent. My parents had chosen their reputation over their daughter. And I was 17, pregnant and homeless, in a town that couldn't stop whispering my name. So let me ask you this, because I need you to really think about it when everything you've ever known abandons you, when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally turn their backs, when you're sitting on a cold sidewalk with a cardboard sign and a baby growing inside you. What do you hold on to? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because this story is just beginning, and what happens next will show you that sometimes the darkest moments are just before the most unexpected miracles. By the end of that first week, I found myself doing something I never imagined I would do. Sitting on the cold concrete outside Miller's grocery store on the corner of Iowa Street and 5th, holding a piece of cardboard I'd found in a dumpster behind the shopping center. With a borrowed marker from a gas station clerk who'd looked at me with pity, I had written 5 words that felt like the death of every dream I'd ever had. Homeless, pregnant, please help. And as I sat there, hugging my small baby bump with one hand and clutching that cardboard sign with the other, snowflakes beginning to fall from a grey December sky, I realized something terrifying. I had become invisible to the world that used to know my name. Cars passed, hundreds of them. Their engines rumbled past like distant thunder, and inside each one, I could see families, mothers and fathers, children in car seats, teenagers texting on their phones, all of them warm, all of them safe, all of them heading home to places where they belonged. And me, I was huddled in a worn coat that didn't quite zip over my growing belly, my hair plastered to my cheeks by tears I couldn't seem to stop crying, waiting for something, anything, to tell me that God hadn't completely forgotten about the girl who used to sing in the church choir. Every coin that dropped into my tin can felt like a small miracle, and with each one I whispered the same desperate prayer: God, please show me a way. Please don't let my baby come into this world with nothing. Please let someone see me. But here's what nobody tells you about being homeless and pregnant in a small town in the middle of winter. The cold isn't the worst part. The hunger isn't even the worst part. The worst part is watching people deliberately look away, watching them speed up as they walk past you, watching them pull their children closer as if poverty and desperation might be contagious. I saw women, my mother's age, clutch their purses tighter and cross to the other side of the parking lot. I saw teenagers from my old high school walk right past me pretending they didn't recognize the girl who used to be on homecoming court. One man actually told me to get a job as he climbed into his BMW, and I wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that I'd tried, that every application I'd filled out was met with the same response once they saw my situation, that nobody wants to hire a pregnant homeless teenager with no address and no references. But I didn't scream. I just sat there, counting my coins, feeling my baby kick inside me, and wondering how much longer I could survive like this. The nights were worse than the days. At least during the day, there were people around, witnesses, the illusion of safety. But when the sun set, and the temperature dropped, and the store lights went off, one by one, I was left alone in the darkness with my fear and my prayers. I would wedge myself between the brick wall and a dumpster, trying to stay out of the wind, wrapping my coat around myself as tightly as possible, one hand always on my belly, talking to my baby in whispers. It's going to be okay, I would tell him, even though I had no idea if that was true. Mommy's going to figure this out. God's going to take care of us. And every time I felt him kick, every time I felt that tiny life moving inside me, I felt this surge of determination mixed with terror, because what if I couldn't protect him? What if my baby came into this world, and all I had to offer him was a cardboard box and broken promises? I had been out there for 5 days when I started to lose hope. 5 days of cold. 5 days of strangers, pity and judgment. 5 days of watching the money in my tin can grow so slowly that I calculated it would take me 3 months to afford even a week in the cheapest motel in town. My lips were chapped and bleeding from the cold. My fingers had stopped feeling anything hours ago, and I was so hungry that my stomach had stopped growling and just ached with a hollow emptiness that made me dizzy every time I tried to stand up. I had used my last dollar to buy a packet of crackers from the gas station, and I'd rationed them out one by one throughout the day, but they were gone now, and I had nothing left. Nothing except faith that was starting to feel more like desperation. Have you ever been so cold that you stopped shivering? That's when you know you're in real danger. That's when your body is giving up, shutting down, preserving what little warmth it has left for your vital organs. I had reached that point on the evening of the 5th day, sitting there with my cardboard sign, watching my breath come out in clouds of frost, when I felt my baby kick hard against my ribs, as if he was trying to wake me up, trying to remind me that I couldn't give up because I wasn't just fighting for my own life anymore. I was fighting for his. And just when I thought I couldn't take another moment of that cold, another moment of that loneliness, another moment of wondering if anyone in this entire world cared whether I lived or died, a silver SUV pulled up to the curb in front of me. The window rolled down, and I looked up into the face of a woman I had never seen before. She was maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and a warm scarf wrapped around her neck, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked, and I wanted to laugh because that question seemed so absurd. Did I look okay sitting on a sidewalk in the snow with a homeless sign? But I couldn't laugh because if I started, I was afraid I would never stop. Instead, I just shook my head, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stare at this stranger who had actually stopped, who had actually seen me. "Get in the car," she said, not as a question but as a command, and she got out and opened the passenger door, and when I hesitated because I'd heard the warnings about getting into cars with strangers, because even in my desperation I was still afraid, she looked me right in the eyes and said, "My name is Cynthia, and I am not going to hurt you, but if you stay out here tonight, you might not make it until morning. So please let me help you." And maybe it was the way she said it, or maybe it was the fact that I had literally nothing left to lose, or maybe it was God answering 5 days' worth of desperate prayers, but I grabbed my tin can with its pathetic collection of coins and I let this stranger named Cynthia help me into her warm car. The moment I sat down, feeling the heated seats beneath me and the warm air from the vents hitting my frozen face, I started to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so far down inside me that I didn't even know that place existed. Cynthia didn't say anything. She just reached into the back seat, pulled out a soft fleece blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, and handed me a thermos of hot chocolate that she'd apparently been drinking. "Take small sips," she said gently. "Your body's been cold for a long time. We need to warm you up slowly." As I sipped that hot chocolate, and I swear to you, nothing has ever tasted better in my entire life, Cynthia started driving, and I realized I had no idea where we were going, and I didn't even care. We could have been heading anywhere, and it would have been better than that sidewalk. But instead of asking me 1,000 questions like I expected, instead of demanding to know my story or judging me for my situation, Cynthia just started talking. She told me about her day at work, about a funny thing her coworker had said, about a recipe she was trying for dinner. Normal things. Beautiful, mundane, normal things. And slowly, wrapped in that warm blanket, sipping that hot chocolate, listening to this stranger talk about ordinary life, I felt something inside me start to unclench. Some tight knot of fear and shame that I'd been carrying for weeks started to loosen just a little bit. After about 10 minutes, we pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house on the edge of town, the kind of house with a wreath on the door and lights in the windows that made it look like something from a Christmas card. Cynthia turned off the car and looked at me. "I know who you are, Abigail," she said quietly, and my heart stopped because I thought this was it. This was where she would tell me she'd made a mistake, that she couldn't help me after all, that she'd heard about the scandal and the pregnancy, and she was sorry but I needed to leave. But instead, she reached over and took my hand. "I know your story because I'm friends with Mrs. Patterson from your old church, and she's been worried sick about you. She told me what happened with your parents, and I've been driving around looking for you for 3 days. 3 days. This woman had spent 3 days searching for a girl she'd never met because someone from my old church had asked her to help. And in that moment, sitting in that warm car in front of that beautiful house, I understood what grace really meant. Not the kind of grace we sang about in hymns or the kind preachers talked about from pulpits, but real, tangible, show up and save a stranger's life grace. "Stay with me tonight," Cynthia said. "We'll figure everything else out tomorrow. But tonight, you need to be warm and safe and fed. Come on." I followed her into that house, and the smell hit me first. Cinnamon and baking bread and something, cooking in a slow cooker, the smell of home, the smell of safety, the smell of everything I'd lost. The house was warm, so warm that I started shivering again as my body remembered what warmth felt like. And Cynthia sat me down on a soft couch and wrapped another blanket around me before disappearing into the kitchen. I sat there, still not quite believing this was real, afraid that if I moved or spoke or did anything, I would wake up and find myself back on that sidewalk. Through the doorway, I could hear Cynthia moving around the kitchen, the sound of a ladle scraping against a pot, the beep of a microwave, the clink of dishes. Normal sounds, beautiful sounds. When she came back, she was carrying a tray with a bowl of vegetable soup and fresh bread, and she set it down in front of me like I was someone worth serving, like I was someone who mattered. "Eat slowly," she said. "I know you're hungry, but your stomach needs time to adjust." I picked up the spoon with hands that were still shaking, and I took that first bite of warm soup, and I swear I almost started crying again because how had my life come to this? How had I gone from Sunday dinners at Matt's lake house to being so grateful for a bowl of soup that it made me want to weep? But I ate, slowly like she'd told me to, and with every bite I felt a little more human, a little less like the invisible girl on the sidewalk. Cynthia sat across from me and just watched, not in a creepy way but in a protective way, like she was making sure I was really okay. And when I'd finished about half the bowl, because my stomach was so shrunken that I couldn't eat more even though I wanted to, she finally asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" And maybe it was because she'd already shown me so much kindness, or maybe it was because I was so tired of carrying this story alone. But I told her everything. I told her about Matt and the pregnancy test and his family whisking him away to Europe. I told her about my father's fist slamming on the table and my mother's tears and the way they'd chosen their reputation over their daughter. I told her about being kicked out of school, about the 5 days on the sidewalk, about the fear that I would give birth in a homeless shelter or worse. And Cynthia listened to all of it without interrupting, without judging, without flinching. When I finished, she reached across and took both of my hands in hers. "I am so sorry that happened to you," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "You've been through something no 17-year-old should ever have to face. But listen to me, Abigail. God has not forgotten you. I know it feels like He has. I know these last few weeks have felt like you've been abandoned by everyone, including Him. But I found you, didn't I? After 3 days of searching, I found you on the exact night when you needed it most. That's not coincidence, sweetheart. That's providence." And then this woman I'd known for less than an hour bowed her head and started to pray. Not a formal prayer or a performative prayer, but a real, honest, desperate prayer, asking God to protect me and my baby. Asking Him to give me strength, thanking Him for allowing her to find me. And as I listened to her pray, something broke open inside me. Something that had been frozen and hard and angry started to thaw, and I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe I really was going to be okay. Maybe this nightmare really did have an ending that wasn't tragic. That night, Cynthia showed me to a guest room upstairs, a real room with a real bed and clean sheets and a window that looked out over a snow-covered backyard. She gave me some of her clothes to sleep in and showed me where the bathroom was, and when she left me alone and closed the door, I just stood there in the middle of that room, almost afraid to move, afraid to disturb anything, afraid that this was all too good to be true. But eventually, I climbed into that bed, and the mattress was soft, and the blankets were warm, and for the first time in 5 days, I felt safe enough to actually sleep. Before I closed my eyes, I placed my hand on my belly and whispered, "We made it through, baby. We're going to be okay." And I prayed a prayer of thanksgiving that was just one word repeated over and over. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But this story doesn't end with that one night of rescue, because charity and kindness only go so far. What happened next would determine whether I would just survive or whether I would actually build a life. When I woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, I had a moment of panic before I remembered where I was. I could smell coffee brewing downstairs and hear someone moving around in the kitchen. I got up slowly, my body aching from weeks of sleeping on concrete, and made my way downstairs to find Cynthia already dressed for work, making breakfast. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, as if it was completely normal to have a homeless pregnant teenager in her house. "How did you sleep?" And I told her the truth, that I'd slept better than I had in months, that I'd actually had dreams, instead of nightmares, that I'd woken up warm for the first time since my parents kicked me out. She smiled at that and handed me a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Eat up," she said. "We need to talk about your future, my future." The words sounded almost absurd. I'd been so focused on just surviving each day that I hadn't let myself think about anything beyond that. But Cynthia was a planner, a problem solver, and she'd apparently spent the night thinking about how to help me. "You can stay here," she said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. "Not just for a few days, for as long as you need, until the baby's born and beyond that if necessary. But staying here isn't enough. You need purpose, you need skills, you need a way to support yourself and your child. So here's what I'm proposing. I own a marketing firm here in town called Grace Marketing. Starting Monday, I want you to come work for me as an intern." I almost choked on my eggs. "But I didn't even finish high school," I said. "I don't know anything about marketing." "Why would you?" Cynthia held up her hand to stop me. "You don't need to know about marketing yet. That's what internships are for, to learn. What I need to know is whether you're willing to work hard, whether you're willing to show up every day and do whatever needs to be done, no matter how small or mundane. Are you willing to do that?" And I looked at this woman who had searched for me for 3 days, who had taken me into her home without hesitation, who was now offering me not just charity but opportunity, and I said the only thing I could say, "Yes, whatever you need me to do, I'll do it." That Sunday, Cynthia took me to her church, not my old church where everyone knew my scandal, but a different congregation across town. I was nervous walking in, my belly now starting to show through my clothes, afraid of the stares and whispers I'd grown so used to. But what I found instead was a community that welcomed me with open arms. People smiled at me. They shook my hand. They asked my name and actually listened when I answered. During the service, the pastor asked for prayer requests, and Cynthia stood up and told the entire congregation about me, about my situation, about my baby, about my need for support. And instead of judgment, instead of shame, what I received was love. People came up to me after the service and pressed money into my hands, or gave me their phone numbers, or invited me to dinner. One woman brought me a bag of maternity clothes her daughter had outgrown. Another family promised to bring me baby supplies. And I stood there overwhelmed, realizing that I'd been so focused on the people who had abandoned me that I'd forgotten there were still good people in the world, people who believed in practicing what they preached about loving their neighbors. Over the next few weeks, Cynthia kept her promise. She took me to her office every day, and she started me at the very bottom, sorting mail, making coffee runs, organizing files, doing all the grunt work that nobody else wanted to do. And I did it all without complaint because I understood what she was really teaching me: responsibility, work ethic, commitment. I was showing up every day, proving that I was reliable, earning my place in that office one mundane task at a time. The other employees were kind to me, though I could see the curiosity in their eyes. This pregnant teenager who'd suddenly appeared in their office, one woman named Jenna, went out of her way to make me feel welcome, showing me around and explaining how things worked. And there was this guy, Luke, who worked in the marketing department. He was white, clean-cut, quiet, and I noticed him watching me sometimes with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not judgment exactly, but something else. Interest, maybe. Curiosity. One day, about 3 weeks into my internship, Cynthia called me into her office. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, but instead she told me about a local charity event that needed marketing support. "I want you to sit in on the planning meeting," she said. "Just observe, take notes, see how we approach these projects." So I sat in that conference room with all these professionals in their business suits, trying to make myself invisible, just listening and learning. But toward the end of the meeting, when they were discussing how to promote the event, I had an idea. It was based on something I'd seen at my old church, the way they'd promoted their annual fundraiser with personal stories instead of just facts and figures. I hesitated, afraid to speak up, but then I thought about everything Cynthia had done for me, about how she'd taken a chance on someone with no experience and no credentials, and I raised my hand. Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt my face get hot, but I pushed through. What if instead of just listing what the charity does, we told individual stories, like found families that had been helped and let them share their experiences in short video clips? There was a moment of silence, and I wanted to die, wanted to take it back, wanted to disappear under the table. But then Cynthia smiled, this huge, genuine smile, and said, "That's actually brilliant, Abigail. Personal narratives create emotional connections that statistics never can." Great thinking. And just like that, my idea became part of the campaign, and I realized something important. I wasn't just capable of surviving. I was capable of contributing. I had value beyond just being someone's charity case. That moment changed something in me. Cynthia started giving me more responsibility, asking my opinion on campaigns, letting me draft social media posts, including me in client meetings. And I soaked it all up like I was dying of thirst and she was offering me water. I read marketing books at night after work. I studied successful campaigns online. I asked questions constantly, probably annoying everyone around me, but I was hungry to learn, desperate to prove that Cynthia's faith in me wasn't misplaced. And slowly, week by week, I started to feel like maybe I could actually do this. Maybe I could actually build a career, support my child, create a life worth living. But life has a way of reminding you that nothing comes easy, and my biggest challenge was still ahead of me. As winter turned to early spring, my belly grew larger and larger, and the reality of what was coming hit me with fresh terror every day. I was going to be a mother. Me, the girl who'd been sleeping on a sidewalk 2 months ago. How was I supposed to take care of a baby when I could barely take care of myself? What if I was a terrible mother? What if I made all the same mistakes my parents had made? What if my baby grew up and hated me for bringing him into a world where I had so little to offer? These fears kept me up at night, even in the safety of Cynthia's guest room, even with a steady job and a supportive community around me. One evening, working late at the office because I'd volunteered to help finish a project, I must have looked particularly stressed because Luke appeared at my desk with 2 cups of coffee. "You okay?" he asked, and I wanted to say yes, wanted to pretend I had everything under control, but I was so tired of pretending. "I'm scared," I admitted, "about the baby, about being a mom, about everything." Luke sat down in the chair across from me and was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Fear means you care. Fear means you understand the weight of what you're about to do. Bad parents don't worry about being bad parents. The fact that you're scared probably means you're going to be great at this." And maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the kindness in his voice, or maybe it was just the relief of having someone acknowledge my fear without trying to fix it, but I started crying right there in the office. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears running down my face while I stared at my computer screen. Luke didn't freak out or leave or tell me to stop. He just handed me a napkin and sat there with me until I pulled myself together. "Thank you," I whispered. I needed to hear that. He smiled, this gentle smile that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since Matt disappeared, and said, "Any time." After that night, Luke and I started talking more. Not anything inappropriate. He was respectful of my situation, of the fact that I was pregnant and broken and barely holding my life together. But he would check in on me, ask how I was feeling, stay late when I stayed late so I wouldn't be working alone. When Malachi, because that's what I'd decided to name my baby, Malachi, which means my messenger, a name that felt like hope. When Malachi started kicking hard enough that you could see it through my shirt, Luke asked if he could feel it. And I let him, this near stranger who was becoming something like a friend, place his hand on my belly and feel my baby kick. "Wow," he breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "That's incredible. You're growing a whole person." And the way he said it, with such awe and respect, made me feel like what I was doing was miraculous instead of shameful. The weeks blurred together in a haze of doctor's appointments that Cynthia drove me to, work projects that I threw myself into as a distraction, and church services where I felt myself slowly healing from the wounds my parents had inflicted. I started volunteering at the church's charity events, the same kind of events that had once helped me, and there was something deeply therapeutic about giving back, about helping people who were in the same desperate situation I'd been in just months before. I shared my story at a small testimony night, standing in front of the congregation with my swollen belly and my trembling voice, telling them about the sidewalk and the cold and the miracle of Cynthia stopping her car. And when I finished, people were crying, and they surrounded me with hugs and prayers, and I felt God's presence so strongly in that moment that I knew that He had been with me even in my darkest hours, even when I couldn't. I'd feel Him, even when I thought He'd abandoned me just like everyone else. Then, on a crisp March morning, when the snow was finally starting to melt and the first hints of spring were appearing in Cedar Falls, I woke up to a sharp pain that took my breath away. Another pain came, then another, and I called out for Cynthia, my voice rising in panic because this was it. This was really happening. My baby was coming, and I was terrified and excited and overwhelmed all at once. Cynthia rushed me to the hospital, holding my hand in the car, praying out loud for a safe delivery and a healthy baby. The labor was long and painful and nothing like what the books had described, and there were moments when I thought I couldn't do it, couldn't push anymore, couldn't handle another contraction. But then the doctor said, "One more push, Abigail, just one more," and I pushed with everything I had left, and suddenly there was this sound, this incredible, beautiful, perfect sound of my baby crying. They placed him on my chest, this tiny, squirming bundle with 10 fingers, and 10 toes and eyes that looked just like mine, and the world stopped. Everything that had happened, the abandonment, the homelessness, the fear, the shame, all of it fell away in that moment because I was holding my son, my Malachi, my messenger from God. I traced his tiny face with my finger and whispered, "Hi, baby. I'm your mama. I'm going to love you forever. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to give you everything I never had." And he stopped crying and looked at me with those unfocused newborn eyes, and I felt something click into place inside me, a sense of purpose so strong and clear that it pushed away every doubt I'd ever had. This was why I'd survived. This was why God had led Cynthia to find me on that sidewalk. This was my future, right here in my arms. Cynthia stood beside my hospital bed with tears streaming down her face, looking at Malachi with the same wonder and love that I felt. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." And in that moment, I understood that family wasn't just about blood. Cynthia had become the mother my own mother couldn't be, and this baby in my arms was going to grow up, knowing he was wanted and loved and cherished, even if his biological father had run away to Europe. But here's the question I need you to think about. because this is where the story gets complicated, I had survived the worst. I had found safety and purpose. I had a son and a mentor and a community. I should have been content, right? I should have been focused on just raising Malachi and building my career and being grateful for everything Cynthia had given me. So why did I find myself noticing the way Luke looked at my son with such tenderness? Why did my heart skip a beat when he showed up at the hospital with a stuffed animal and a card? Why was I starting to feel something I swore I would never let myself feel again? And the bigger question, did I even deserve to find love after everything that had happened? Or was I setting myself up for another devastating fall? The question I left you with wasn't rhetorical. It was real, and it haunted me every single day for the next 2 years. Did I deserve love after everything that had happened? Could a girl who'd been abandoned and betrayed actually open her heart again without it destroying her? Because here's what nobody tells you about trauma. It doesn't just go away when your circumstances improve. You can have a job and a home and a beautiful baby and still wake up at 3 in the morning convinced that it's all going to disappear, that you're one mistake away from being back on that sidewalk. And as I watched Malachi grow from a newborn into a toddler, as I climbed the ladder at Grace Marketing, from intern to full employee to team leader, as I rebuilt my life piece by careful piece, there was always this voice in the back of my head whispering that I didn't deserve any of it, that I was fooling everyone, that eventually they would all see the truth and leave just like Matt and my parents had left. But Luke didn't leave. After Malachi was born, after those first overwhelming weeks of sleepless nights and learning to be a mother while still working full-time, Luke became a constant presence in our lives in a way that felt so natural I almost didn't notice it happening. It started small. He would stay late at the office when I stayed late, keeping me company while Malachi napped in the portable crib Cynthia had set up in the break room. He would bring me coffee in the morning, always made exactly the way I liked it. Even though I'd never told him how I took my coffee, he'd just paid attention. When I had to present a campaign to a difficult client, and I was so nervous I thought I might throw up, Luke squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "You've got this. You've survived harder things than a boardroom." And he was right. I did have it. I walked into that meeting and I crushed it, and when I came out, Luke was waiting, with that proud smile that made me feel like I could conquer the world. The thing about falling in love slowly is that you don't realize it's happening until you're already in too deep to turn back. There was no dramatic moment, no grand gesture, no obvious turning point. It was 1,000 small kindnesses that added up to something bigger than I knew how to name. It was Luke reading Goodnight Moon to Malachi in funny voices while I finished up reports. It was him showing up at Cynthia's house on Saturday mornings with donuts and an offer to watch Malachi so I could sleep in. It was the way he looked at my son, not with pity or obligation, but with genuine affection, like Malachi was someone worth loving for his own sake, and not just because he came with me. And slowly, despite every protective wall I'd built around my heart, despite every promise I'd made to myself that I would never be vulnerable again, I started to feel something shift inside me. One evening, about 8 months after Malachi was born, I was working, late on a social media campaign that was due the next morning. My eyes were burning from staring at the computer screen, and I'd probably had too much coffee, and Malachi was fussy because he could sense my stress. I was bouncing him on my hip with one hand and trying to type with the other, and I was about 2 minutes away from a complete breakdown when Luke appeared in my office doorway. "Okay, that's enough," he said, not unkindly. "You're exhausted. Come on." And before I could protest, he'd taken Malachi from my arms and was leading me out to the office balcony that overlooked the downtown Cedar Falls skyline. The cold night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. Luke was holding Malachi against his chest, and my son had already stopped fussing, content in Luke's arms in a way that made my heart do something complicated. "You're burning yourself out," Luke said quietly, looking out at the city lights. "You work harder than anyone else here, Abigail. You've got nothing left to prove." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "I have everything to prove. I'm a teenage mom with no degree who's only here because Cynthia took pity on me. If I don't work twice as hard as everyone else? Luke turned to look at me, and his expression was so fierce it stopped me mid-sentence. That's not why you're here. You're here because you're talented and creative, and you care about doing good work. Cynthia didn't keep you on out of pity. She kept you on because you're an asset to this company. When are you going to start believing that? Nobody had ever talked to me like that before. Matt had complimented me, sure, but it was always surface level. I was pretty, I was sweet, I was fun to be around. Luke was talking about who I actually was, the person I'd become through fire and struggle. And maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the way he was holding my son like Malachi belonged in his arms. Or maybe it was just that I was tired of being scared all the time, but I felt something crack open inside me. Luke, I started, not even sure what I was going to say, but he gently shifted Malachi to one arm and reached out with his free hand to brush a strand of hair away from my face, the same gesture he'd made once before, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like a question. I know you've been hurt, he said softly, his fingers barely touching my cheek. I know Matt destroyed your ability to trust anyone, but Abigail, I need you to hear me. I'm not Matt. I'm not going anywhere. I see you, really see you, and I admire your strength and your faith and the way you love this little boy with everything you have. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I want to be here for you, for both of you, if you'll let me. And then he leaned in and kissed my forehead, the same chaste kiss he'd given me once before. But this time, he lingered, and I felt my eyes close, felt myself lean into that tenderness I'd been so afraid to accept. When he pulled back, I opened my eyes and saw him watching me with such open affection that it scared me and thrilled me all at once. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if I let myself care about you and then you leave? What if Malachi gets attached to you and then you decide this is too complicated? What if? Luke shifted Malachi to his other arm and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. What if it works? He interrupted gently. What if I stay? What if we build something real and good together? What if Malachi grows up with a father figure who actually shows up? You've been asking yourself all the ways this could go wrong, Abigail, but have you considered that maybe, just maybe, it could go right? And that question, that simple, terrifying, hopeful question, changed everything. Because he was right. I'd been so focused on protecting myself from future pain that I hadn't allowed myself to consider the possibility of future joy. Standing there on that balcony with Luke holding my son and my hand, with the city lights twinkling below us and the cold night air making our breath visible in little clouds, I made a choice. I chose to be brave. I chose to take the risk. I chose to believe that maybe God hadn't brought me this far just to let me fall again. Okay, I whispered. Let's try. And Luke smiled. Not a triumphant smile or a smug smile, but a relieved smile, like he'd been holding his breath waiting for my answer. Okay, he echoed, squeezing my hand. And right there, with Malachi between us already dozing off against Luke's shoulder, we started something new. Something that felt like the opposite of everything I'd experienced with Matt. Where Matt had been all flash and excitement and empty promises, Luke was steady and thoughtful and showed up. Where Matt had run at the first sign of difficulty, Luke leaned in. Where Matt had made me feel like I needed to be someone else to be worthy of love, Luke made me feel like the person I already was, broken parts and all, was enough. The months that followed were like learning to breathe again after being underwater for too long. Luke and I took things slowly, carefully, always with Malachi's well-being at the center of every decision. Our first real date wasn't anything fancy, just the two of us and Malachi at a local apple orchard on a Saturday afternoon. In late September, when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air had that perfect autumn crispness, I watched Luke crouch down to Malachi's level and show him how to pick an apple gently, guiding my son's small hands to choose the ripest fruit from a low-hanging branch. Malachi laughed with pure delight when the apple came free, and Luke tossed him up in the air and caught him, and my son shrieked with joy, and I felt my heart expand in my chest until I thought it might burst. This was what I dreamed of when I was sitting on that sidewalk. Not just survival, but this. Joy, family, love that didn't ask me to be anything other than myself. We went on more dates, always with Malachi, because I wasn't ready to leave him with a babysitter yet, and Luke never complained or suggested we needed alone time. We went for ice cream and walks in the park and to children's museums, where Luke would get just as excited about the exhibits as Malachi did. And with every outing, every shared moment, every time Luke picked Malachi up when he fell or wiped his tears or made him giggle, I felt myself falling deeper into something I'd been afraid to name. One Sunday, Luke invited us to his parents' house for a family barbecue, and I was so nervous I changed my outfit 3 times. What if they hated me? What if they thought I was using their son? What if they saw me as the scandal I'd been instead of the person I was becoming? But when we arrived at Luke's childhood home, a modest ranch house with a well-kept lawn and a tire swing in the backyard, his parents greeted me with such warmth that I almost cried. His mother, Patricia, hugged me like I was already family, and his father, Tom, shook my hand and then immediately got down on the floor to play with Malachi. During dinner, as we sat around their kitchen table eating burgers and potato salad, I excused myself to use the bathroom, and on my way back, I passed the hallway and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Luke's parents were in their bedroom, kneeling beside their bed, and I could hear his mother's voice clearly. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing Abigail and Malachi into Luke's life. Thank you for this beautiful woman who has overcome so much. Please help her to heal from her past hurts. Please let her know how much she is loved and valued. And please, if it's your will, let our family be a place of safety and acceptance for her." I stood there in that hallway with tears streaming down my face, my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud, because they were praying for me. These people who barely knew me were on their knees asking God to bless me and heal me and welcome me into their family. And in that moment, I understood something profound. God hadn't just sent Cynthia to rescue me from that sidewalk. He'd been orchestrating a much bigger plan, bringing people into my life who would show me what real love looked like: unconditional, sacrificial, showing up even when it's hard love. When I composed myself and went back to the kitchen, Patricia caught my eye and smiled knowingly. And I realized she'd known I was there, that she'd wanted me to hear those prayers. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and no words were necessary. I was home. Not the home I'd lost, but a better one, built on grace instead of reputation, on love instead of shame. As that year turned into the next, as Malachi grew from a baby into a walking, talking toddler with opinions and a personality all his own, my life continued to transform in ways I couldn't have imagined. At Grace Marketing, Cynthia promoted me to social media manager, putting me in charge of a team of 3 other people. Me, the girl who'd been sorting mail just 2 years ago, managing a team and presenting to major clients and making real money that I could save for Malachi's future. I started mentoring new interns the way Cynthia had mentored me, and I found deep satisfaction in helping other young people find their footing in the professional world. One intern, a young woman named Jasmine who was working her way through community college, reminded me so much of myself that I went out of my way to invest in her, to show her that circumstances don't define potential. Luke and I continued to grow closer, building a relationship that felt fundamentally different from anything I'd experienced before. On cold Christmas Eve, we took Malachi to see the lights downtown, and as we stood there watching my son's face light up with wonder at all the decorations, Luke took my hand and said, "I know it's early, and I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know something. I'm in this for the long haul. I love you, Abigail. I love Malachi. And I want to be a real family with you both, whenever you're ready." I looked at this man who had shown me through actions, not just words, what commitment really meant, and I said the words I'd been too afraid to say for months: "I love you too." And yes, we're a family. We've been a family for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. We didn't rush into anything, didn't move in together or get engaged right away because We both understood that building something lasting takes time and intention. But we were together in all the ways that mattered. Luke was there for Malachi's second birthday party, helping me bake a lopsided cake and laughing with me when it fell apart. He was there when Malachi said his first full sentence, "Luke, play ball," and the joy on Luke's face made me fall in love with him all over again. He was there during the hard moments too, like when Malachi got sick with a high fever and I was panicking, and Luke drove us to urgent care at 2 in the morning and held my hand while the doctors examined my son. He showed up, again and again and again. He showed up. And slowly, my fear that he would leave began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that this was real, that he meant what he said, that I could actually trust another person with my heart. But there was still one piece of my past that remained unresolved, one wound that hadn't fully healed, my family. In the 2.5 years since they'd kicked me out, I'd had no contact with my parents. Cynthia had tried to reach out to them once on my behalf, shortly after Malachi was born, thinking maybe they'd want to know about their grandson. My mother had answered the phone and listened to everything Cynthia said, and then she'd replied quietly, "Please tell Abigail we're glad she's doing well, but we're not ready yet. The church community still talks, and it's still too hard." And that was it. No request to meet Malachi, no apology, no explanation of when they might be ready. Just "it's too hard," as if my being homeless and pregnant hadn't been hard, as if giving birth alone hadn't been hard, as if raising a child as a teenager without any family support hadn't been the hardest thing I'd ever done. I'd be lying if I said that rejection didn't hurt. It did. It hurt in a deep, aching way that never quite went away. There were moments, Malachi's first steps, his first words, his second birthday, when I desperately wished I could call my mother and share these milestones and the knowledge that she'd chosen her reputation over. These moments with her grandson felt like a fresh wound every time. But I'd also learned something important in those years. Family isn't just about biology. Cynthia had been more of a mother to me than my own mother had been. Luke's parents had welcomed me as a daughter, when my own parents wouldn't even talk to me. My church community had supported me through everything. I had a family. It just looked different than I'd expected. Still, there was a part of me that wondered if reconciliation was even possible. Could I forgive my parents for abandoning me when I needed them most? Should I forgive them, or would that just be letting them off the hook for the pain they'd caused? These questions swirled in my mind constantly, especially at night when I couldn't sleep, and I prayed about it often, asking God to show me what healing was supposed to look like. The answer came in an unexpected way, during a sermon at church one Sunday morning about the nature of forgiveness. The pastor said something that lodged in my heart like a splinter. Forgiveness isn't saying that what someone did to you was okay, it's saying that you refuse to let what they did continue to poison your life. It's setting yourself free from the burden of bitterness, regardless of whether the other person ever apologizes or changes. That sermon stayed with me for weeks. Was I carrying bitterness? Absolutely. Was it poisoning my life? Maybe not in obvious ways, but I could feel it there, a heaviness in my chest whenever I thought about my parents, an anger that would flare up at unexpected moments. And I realized that for my own sake, for Malachi's sake, for the future I was trying to build, I needed to let it go. Not forget, never forget, but release the anger and make room for something else. So I started praying for my parents, actually praying for them instead of praying about them. I prayed that they would find peace. I prayed that they would grow and change. I prayed that someday, if it was God's will, we might be able to have a relationship again. But I also prayed for the strength to be okay if that never happened. To build a good life, regardless of whether they were part of it. And then, about 3 years after everything had fallen apart, I got an invitation that would force me to confront my past head-on. The 10-year reunion for Jefferson High School's class of 2015. The invitation came in the mail, a cheerful card with red and gold banners announcing the event at the old gymnasium, and I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking slightly. Did I want to go back there? Did I want to face all those people who'd known me as the pregnant girl who'd been kicked out senior year? Did I want to subject myself to their whispers and judgment and fake sympathy? My first instinct was to throw the invitation away and pretend it had never arrived. But then I looked at Malachi, playing with his blocks on the floor, and I looked at Luke, who was reading over my shoulder, and I thought about everything I'd accomplished despite the scandal, despite the abandonment, despite every obstacle that had been thrown in my path. And I realized I wasn't ashamed anymore. I'd survived. More than that, I'd thrived. I had a career, a family, a son I adored, and a man who loved me for exactly who I was. So why shouldn't I go back to Cedar Falls and show them all that their judgment hadn't destroyed me? "I think you should go," Luke said quietly, as if he could read my thoughts. "Not for them, for you. Show yourself how far you've come." Cynthia, when I told her about the invitation, said almost the same thing. "Abigail, you've spent 3 years rebuilding your life from nothing. You've turned tragedy into triumph. Don't hide that light under a bushel basket. Go back there and let them see what God's grace looks like." So I please replied yes, and as the date approached, I found myself getting more and more nervous. What would I say to people? What if Matt was there? What if my parents had been invited as community members and they showed up? What if everyone just stared at me like I was still that broken, desperate girl? The night of the reunion, I stood in front of my mirror for a long time, adjusting my simple but elegant dress, trying to see myself the way others would see me. I wasn't 17 anymore. I was a 27-year-old professional with a successful career, a beautiful son, and a loving partner. The girl who'd sat on that sidewalk felt like a different person, someone I remembered but was no longer defined by. Luke came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said. "But more importantly, you look strong. You look like someone who's overcome hell and come out better for it. They're going to see that the moment you walk in." I turned and kissed him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Come with me," I said. "I need you there. Both of you." And so it was decided we would go as a family, me, Luke, and Malachi, 3 years old now, and full of questions about why we were getting dressed up. The drive to Cedar Falls took 40 minutes, and with every mile, I felt my anxiety increase. By the time we pulled into the parking lot of Jefferson High, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The gymnasium looked exactly the same brick exterior, same entrance where I'd walked in 1,000 times as a student. Same football field visible in the distance where I'd cheered at homecoming games before everything fell apart. Luke parked the car and turned to look at me. "You ready?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath, looked back at Malachi in his car seat, and nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be. Let's do this." Walking into that gymnasium felt like stepping back in time and forward into the future all at once. The decorations were red and gold, our school colors, with banners proclaiming Jefferson High Class of 2015, 10-year reunion, and tables set up with name tags and old yearbooks. Music played from speakers, pop songs from our high school days that brought back memories both sweet and bitter. And then people started turning to look at us, and I felt that familiar weight of being watched, being evaluated, being judged. I pressed my shoulders back, held my head high, and walked further into the room with Luke's hand in mine and Malachi's tiny hand in the other. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't apologizing. I was simply existing as the person I'd become, and if they had a problem with that, it was their problem, not mine. The whispers started immediately, just like I'd known they would. I heard fragments of conversations as we passed. "Is that really Abigail? I heard she'd disappeared. That's the girl from the scandal, right? She looks different. Is that her kid?" But mixed in with the gossip were faces that lit up with genuine warmth. Tyrese, who'd sat behind me in calculus, came over and gave me a huge hug. "Abigail, man, it's so good to see you. We heard what happened back then, and I've always wondered how you were doing." His girlfriend, Keisha, wiped tears from her eyes and said, "We always believed you'd make it. You were too strong not to." Those words, simple, honest, kind, meant more to me than they could possibly know. These were people who remembered me not as a scandal, but as a person, and their belief that I would survive had been proven right. Marisol, my childhood friend who I'd lost touch with after everything happened, spotted me from across the room and came running over. Abigail? Oh my God, is it really you? She threw her arms around me and I hugged her back, feeling years of distance melt away. You look amazing, she said, pulling back to really look at me. Everyone's been wondering what happened to you all these years. Some people said you'd moved away, others said, well, other things. But you're here, and you brought your family. I introduced her to Luke and Malachi, and she cooed over my son with such genuine affection that I remembered why we'd been friends in the first place. She wasn't there to judge, she was there to reconnect. As the evening went on, more people approached me. Sarah from Yearbook Club congratulated me on my success. Apparently word had gotten around through mutual acquaintances that I was working in marketing and doing well. A few people asked about Matt, where he was, if we were still in touch, and I smiled politely and said, that's ancient history. I've moved on to better things, gesturing to Luke and Malachi. Some people looked uncomfortable with that answer, like they'd been hoping for juicy gossip, but others nodded approvingly. One woman, Emily, who'd been in my English class, pulled me aside and said quietly, I just want you to know what they did to you. Your parents kicking you out, the school expelling you, it wasn't right. A lot of us thought so at the time, but we were too young and scared to say anything. I'm sorry we didn't stand up for you. I hadn't expected an apology, hadn't even known I needed one, but hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. The DJ started playing slow songs, and couples moved to the dance floor. Luke leaned over and asked, want to dance? And I nodded, taking his hand. We swayed together under the same fairy lights that had been there a decade ago, and I rested my head on his chest and closed my eyes, feeling Malachi clinging to my leg, not wanting to be left out. Luke laughed and picked him up, and we danced as a family, this beautiful, unconventional, hard-won family that I'd built from nothing. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been tight and fearful for years suddenly loosen and release. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I'd responded to it, by the person I'd chosen to become, by the faith I'd held onto even when it felt like God wasn't listening. As the night wore on and we prepared to leave, as I was saying goodbye to Marisol and promising to keep in touch this time, I looked toward the exit and froze. Standing just inside the doorway, looking uncertain and small in a way I'd never seen them look before, were my parents. My mother saw me first, and her hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes were already red, like he'd been crying in the car before working up the courage to come inside. And for a moment, time stopped. All the hurt and anger and abandonment came rushing back, but so did something else, something softer. Something that felt like a door opening in my heart that I'd thought was permanently closed. They didn't move toward me right away, they just stood there, and I could see in my mother's face that she was terrified. I would turn away, that I would reject them the way they'd rejected me. And I won't lie, part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to walk right past them and show them what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to not matter. But then I felt Luke's hand on my back, steady and supportive, and I looked down at Malachi, who was looking at these strangers with curious eyes, and I remembered that pastor's sermon about forgiveness being for yourself, not for the person who hurt you. I remembered all the prayers I'd said, asking God to help me let go of the bitterness. And I made a choice that was harder than anything I'd done on that sidewalk 3 years ago. I chose to walk toward them. My mother met me halfway, and she was already crying, tears streaming down her face in rivers. Abigail, she whispered, reaching out tentatively like she was afraid I might pull away. Honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then she was hugging me, holding me tight, and I felt my own tears start to fall. My father came up behind her, and I could see the shame and regret written all over his face. We were wrong, he said, his voice breaking. We were so wrong, Abigail. We let fear and pride destroy our relationship with our daughter. We chose what people thought over what was right, and we've regretted it every single day since. He was crying now too, this man who'd always been so strong and stern. And I felt something in my chest crack wide open. "Why now?" I asked, not accusingly but genuinely wanting to understand. "Why after 3 years? Why tonight?" My mother wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "Because Mrs. Patterson from church, Cynthia's friend, she's been talking to us, challenging us, asking us hard questions about what kind of Christians we were if we could abandon our daughter when she needed us most. And then we heard you were coming to the reunion, and we knew we couldn't hide anymore. We had to face what we'd done. We had to at least try to ask for your forgiveness, even if you can't give it." She looked at Malachi, who was holding onto my leg and watching these emotional adults with wide eyes. Is that our grandson?" she whispered. I picked Malachi up and held him close. "This is Malachi. He's 3 years old. He's smart and funny, and he loves dinosaurs and singing. And he's never met his grandparents because his grandparents decided their reputation was more important than their family." I said it calmly, not with anger but with simple truth, and I watched them both flinch at the words. "But," I continued, and I saw hope flicker in my mother's eyes, "he could meet them now. If they're serious about being in his life, if they understand that this isn't just about saying sorry, it's about showing up from now on." My father nodded vigorously, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "We'll show up. However you'll let us, whenever you'll let us, we'll be there. We've missed so much already. We don't want to miss any more." I looked at Luke, who'd been standing quietly beside me through all of this, and he gave me a small, encouraging nod. This was my decision, my forgiveness to give or withhold. I looked at my parents, these flawed, frightened people who'd hurt me more deeply than anyone except Matt, but who were here now, asking for a chance to make it right. And I thought about all the grace I'd been given over the past 3 years. Cynthia taking me in when she didn't have to, Luke loving me despite all my baggage, his parents welcoming me into their family, my church community supporting me without judgment. All of that grace, freely given, undeserved, transformative. How could I refuse to extend that same grace to my own parents, especially when they were genuinely repentant? "Okay," I said softly, and my mother let out a sob of relief. "But we're starting over. You don't just get to walk back into my life and pretend the last 3 years didn't happen. We're going to have to rebuild trust, and that takes time. Malachi doesn't know you, so we'll start slow. Short visits, public places, no pressure. And you need to understand that Luke is my family now too. He's been a father to Malachi when you weren't there, and you will respect that." My father nodded solemnly. "We understand, and we'll do whatever it takes." "Thank you, Abigail. Thank you for giving us a chance we don't deserve." My mother crouched down to Malachi's level, and she was smiling through her tears. "Hi, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm your grandma. I've wanted to meet you for such a long time." Malachi looked at me for permission, and when I nodded, he gave my mother a small wave. "Hi," he said shyly. "I like your necklace." It was such a simple, innocent comment, but it made my mother start crying all over again. She touched the cross pendant around her neck, the same one she'd worn for years, and said, "Thank you, honey. Maybe next time we see each other, I can tell you about it." We didn't stay much longer after that. The emotional weight of the evening had exhausted all of us, and Malachi was starting to get fussy. But before we left, I made plans with my parents to meet for lunch the following weekend, neutral territory at a family restaurant where we could talk more and start the long process of healing. As Luke drove us home that night, with Malachi already asleep in his car seat and the cedar, Fall's lights disappearing behind us, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect or because all the hurt had magically disappeared, but because I'd done the hard thing. I'd faced my past, I'd extended forgiveness, and I'd opened the door to reconciliation while still maintaining healthy boundaries. "You were incredible tonight," Luke said quietly, reaching over to take my hand. "The way you handled everything with your parents, the grace you showed them, while still standing up for yourself and Malachi, that was really something." I squeezed his hand and smiled. "I learned from the best. Cynthia showed me what grace looks like. Your parents showed me what unconditional acceptance looks like. You showed me what real love looks like. I'm just passing it forward." Luke was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I have something I want to ask you, but I want to wait until the timing is right. But I want you to know I'm ready whenever you are. This family we've built, I want to make it official." My heart skipped a beat, understanding what he was saying without him having to spell it out. "Luke," I started, but he shook his head gently. "You don't have to answer now. I just wanted you to know where my head and heart are. There's no rush. We move at whatever pace feels right for you." I felt tears prick my eyes again, happy tears this time. "I love you," I said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. And yes, whenever the timing is right, my answer is yes." Luke's face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and even though we were on the highway and he couldn't stop the car, he lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it. "Then we're going to have a beautiful life together," he said. "You, me, and Malachi. A family built on faith and love, and all the lessons we learned the hard way. The weeks and months that followed were like watching a garden grow after a long winter. My relationship with my parents was slow and sometimes awkward. There were conversations where old hurts surfaced and had to be addressed, moments when I had to remind them that their opinions about how I lived my life were no longer relevant, unless I asked for them, boundaries that had to be established and reinforced. But there were also beautiful moments, watching my mother hold Malachi for the first time and sing him the same lullabies she'd once sung to me, seeing my father's face light up when Malachi called him Grandpa, having Sunday dinners together where we actually talked and laughed, and remembered that we had been a family once and could be again, different but still connected. My father eventually pulled me aside one evening and gave me the apology I hadn't known I needed. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "What I did, kicking you out, choosing our reputation over your safety, that wasn't about you. It was about my own fear and pride. I was terrified of what people would think, of how it would reflect on me as a father and a church leader, and I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that tough love would somehow help you. But all I did was abandon my daughter when she needed me most, and I've had to live with that shame every day. You were the strong one, Abigail. You survived despite me, not because of me, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become, even though I have no right to take any credit for it." Hearing those words didn't erase the pain, but it helped. It helped to know that he understood the depth of what he'd done, that he wasn't minimizing or making excuses. And slowly, carefully, with Cynthia's wisdom guiding me and Luke's support holding me steady, I let my parents back into my life. Not all the way, not immediately, but enough. Enough to let Malachi know his grandparents. Enough to attend church with them occasionally. Enough to call my mother when I had good news to share. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before everything fell apart. It couldn't be because too much had happened, but it was something new and maybe even healthier, built on honesty and grace rather than expectations and appearances. At work, I continued to grow and excel. Cynthia promoted me to Director of Marketing, making me one of the youngest executives in the company. I hired Jasmine, the intern I'd been mentoring, as a full-time employee, and watching her succeed filled me with the same joy I imagined Cynthia had felt watching me succeed. I spoke at local business conferences about my journey, not shying away from the difficult parts but framing them as the crucible that had forged me into the professional I'd become. Young women would come up to me after these talks, some of them with tears in their eyes, telling me that my story gave them hope for their own difficult circumstances. And I realized that this was part of my purpose. Not just to survive and succeed, for my own sake, but to be a light for others walking through their own darkness. Luke and I continued to build our life together, and 8 months after, the reunion, on a beautiful spring evening with cherry blossoms falling like snow, he took me back to that office balcony where we'd had our first real conversation about being together. Malachi was with Luke's parents for the evening, and it was just the two of us, under the stars, and I knew what was coming before he even got down on one knee. "Abigail," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "you are the strongest, most faithful, most beautiful person I've ever known. You've taught me what real courage looks like, what it means to trust God even when everything is falling apart, what love really means. I want to spend the rest of my life showing up for you and Malachi. I want to be the father Malachi deserves and the husband you deserve. Will you marry me? I was crying before he even finished, crying and nodding and pulling him to his feet so I could kiss him. Yes, I said against his lips. Yes, yes, yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped a simple, beautiful ring onto my finger, not ostentatious or flashy like Matt would have chosen, but thoughtful and perfect, just like Luke himself. We stood there on that balcony holding each other, and I thought about the journey that had led me to this moment. From the girl who'd believed in fairy tales with the wrong person, to the girl crying on a sidewalk with a cardboard sign, to the woman standing here now with a career and a family and a future that was brighter than anything I could have imagined. God had been faithful even when I couldn't see it, even when it felt like he'd abandoned me. He'd been orchestrating all of this, the suffering and the rescue, the struggle and the triumph, the breaking and the healing, into something beautiful. We got married 6 months later, in a small ceremony at the church where Cynthia had first taken me, surrounded by everyone who'd been part of our journey. Cynthia walked me down the aisle because she'd earned that honor more than anyone. Luke's parents were there beaming with pride. My parents were there too, crying happy tears and hugging me before the ceremony, thanking me again for giving them a second chance. Malachi was our ring bearer, taking his job very seriously as he carried the rings down the aisle on a little pillow. And when Luke and I said our vows, promises to love and honor and show up for each other through whatever came next, I meant every word with my whole heart. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was better than a fairy tale. This was real love, earned through hardship and proven through consistency, built on a foundation of faith and grace and second chances. After the ceremony, during the reception, Cynthia pulled me aside. She had tears in her eyes as she looked at me in my simple white dress, happy and loved and surrounded by family. "Do you remember that first night?" she asked. "When I picked you up outside the grocery store and you could barely speak because you were so cold and scared?" I nodded, my own eyes filling with tears. I remember every detail. That was the night my life changed. Cynthia squeezed my hands. "I knew the moment I saw you that God had put you in my path for a reason. I just didn't know then that you would end up blessing my life as much as I'd hoped to bless yours. You've taught me about resilience and faith and grace. You've made me a better person, and watching you become the woman you are now, successful, confident, loving, forgiving, has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I wouldn't be here without you," I said, hugging her tightly. "You saved my life that night. You gave me everything, a home, a job, a family, hope. I can never repay you for that." Cynthia pulled back and smiled through her tears. "You don't need to repay me, honey. You're living your best life, raising that beautiful boy, loving well and working hard and staying faithful to God. That's all the repayment I could ever want. You took the chance I gave you and you ran with it. That's all you, Abigail. I just opened the door. You're the one who walked through it and kept walking even when it was hard." We hugged again, and I silently thanked God for bringing this woman into my life at exactly the moment when I needed her most. As the evening wound down and Luke and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, a modest trip to a cabin in the mountains because we had a family to think about and couldn't splurge too extravagantly, I looked around at everyone who'd come to celebrate with us. My parents talking with Luke's parents, building bridges and connections. Cynthia laughing with my former co-workers. Malachi running around with the other children, his face sticky with cake and his dress shirt already stained. My church family who'd supported me when I had nothing. All these people who'd shown me different facets of God's love and grace. And I felt overwhelmed with gratitude, the kind that makes your chest feel too small to contain all the emotion. "Ready to start our next chapter?" Luke asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. I leaned back against him and watched our son play, this beautiful boy who'd been born into such difficult circumstances, but who would grow up surrounded by love and stability and faith. "More than ready," I said. "God has been so good to us, Luke, even in the hardest times, even when I couldn't see it. He was working everything together for good. Luke kissed my temple. "He brought me you," he said simply. "That alone proves he's got a pretty incredible plan." Now, as I stand here years later, looking back on everything that happened, the fairy tale that turned into a nightmare, the nightmare that turned into a wilderness, and the wilderness that turned into a blessing, I understand that my story was never really about me at all. It was about God's faithfulness, about the way He uses broken things to create something beautiful, about how He puts people in our paths at exactly the right moment to save us, or challenge us, or help us grow. It was about learning that family isn't always blood, that love isn't always easy, that forgiveness is a choice we make for ourselves, and that the trials we face don't define us. How we respond to them does. I went from being the girl with the cardboard sign to the woman with the career and the family and the testimony. Malachi is thriving, growing into a kind and confident young boy who knows he's loved by so many people. My relationship with my parents continues to heal, slowly but surely. Luke and I are building a marriage based on mutual respect and showing up for each other day after day, even when it's boring or hard or unglamorous. And Cynthia, my guardian, Angel, my mentor, my second mother, remains a constant presence in our lives, loving us well and reminding me where I came from whenever I start to forget. If I could go back and talk to that 17-year-old girl sitting on the sidewalk, shaking with cold and fear and desperation, I would tell her this: hold on. Just hold on a little longer. The silver SUV is coming. Cynthia is searching for you right now. Luke is waiting for you in the future. Your son is going to be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Your parents are going to come back and apologize. You're going to have a career you love, and a family that chooses you, and a life that proves God never abandoned you. The pain you're feeling right now is real and valid and terrible, but it's not the end of your story. It's not even the middle. It's just the dark before the dawn, the winter before the spring, the wilderness before the promised land. So hold on, Abigail. Hold on to your faith. Hold on to that baby in your belly. Hold on to the belief that God is good, even when life isn't. Because I promise you, I swear to you, everything is going to be more than okay. Everything is going to be beautiful. That's the message I want to leave with anyone who's listening to this story right now, wherever you are, whatever you're facing, however broken your circumstances might seem. Hold on. God is faithful even when people aren't. Grace is real even when judgment is loud. Redemption is possible even when everyone has given up on you. Your darkest valley might be the path to your greatest blessing. The people who abandon you might not be the people who are meant to stay. And sometimes the family you build is better than the family you were born into, because it's chosen, with intention, and nurtured with love, and held together by something stronger than obligation. My life became a testimony to faith, forgiveness, and the miracles that happen when we refuse to give up. I proved that you can lose everything and still build a beautiful life. I proved that being kicked out and homeless and pregnant at 17 doesn't mean you're destined to fail. It might just mean you're being prepared for something greater than you could have imagined. I proved that the opinions of small-minded people don't determine your worth, that scandal doesn't. Define your character, and that God's plan is always bigger and better than our own limited vision. So to everyone watching this, to everyone who's been abandoned or betrayed or told they'll never amount to anything, to everyone who's sitting on their own sidewalk with their own cardboard sign, wondering if anyone will ever stop and see them, I see you. God sees you. Your story isn't over. The best chapters might still be ahead of you, waiting to be written. Hold on to faith when everything else is stripped away, because faith is the only thing that can't be taken from you. Believe that you are worthy of love and respect and second chances, because you are. And know that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. My name is Abigail, and this is my story. It's a story of falling and rising, of loss and restoration, of abandonment and belonging, of shame and dignity, of a girl who became a woman through fire and came out refined instead of destroyed. It's a story of God's faithfulness, human kindness, and the power of refusing to let your circumstances define your future. And if my story can give hope to even one person who's walking through their own wilderness right now, then every moment of pain and struggle was worth it. Because we're not just surviving for ourselves, we're surviving to show others that survival is possible, that thriving is possible, that redemption is real, and grace is abundant, and love, real, honest, show-up, everyday love, is worth waiting for. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for listening to my story, for witnessing my testimony. I hope it encouraged you. I hope it challenged you. I hope it reminded you that no matter how dark your night might be, morning is coming. God is faithful. Grace is real. And your story, like mine, is still being written. If you enjoyed this story and it touched your heart in any way, I want to ask you for a favor. Please hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what part of Abigail's journey resonated with you most, and subscribe to this channel. You see, I'm a father trying to make my kid happy this Christmas, and every like, every comment, every subscription helps me do that. Your engagement doesn't just help the algorithm, it helps my family. So if this story moved you, if it gave you hope, or made you think differently about redemption and second chances, please take 5 seconds right now to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you learned from Abigail's story, or share your own story of overcoming difficult circumstances. Your engagement matters more than you know, and it would mean the world to me and my family. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next